Welcome to everyone here at City Council Chambers for this second recognition of the Black experience in American history. Last week, we heard a discussion about Black political leaders in Fayette County, 1896, 1918. Tonight, we have a really special guest that's going to talk to us about the Black experience as well. Before that, special thanks to the City Council of Oak Hill for approving the series and for funding it. Also, special thanks to our speaker, who I'll introduce in just a minute. And also a special thanks to Rhonda Falk, the Administrative Assistant at City Hall, and to Valerie Vaughn, who is operating all the technical things to make it possible for live stream. And of course, Aaron Reed, right here, the Coordinator of Economic Development for Oak Hill, who has done a really good job public relations wise in helping to put this together as well. And we have two members of the City Council tonight. We're glad to see Councilwoman Janey, Councilman Smallwood, and a guest from Beckley, Councilwoman Bullock, right here, who has come from Beckley to hear this presentation. Our speaker tonight, born in Atlanta, lives in Charleston. He was active in the Ebenezer Baptist Church, the historic church in Atlanta, and his family was close to the family of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He's a graduate of Morehouse College, served as an assistant to Drs. Martin Luther King, Sr. and Jr., and he delivered a prayer at the funeral of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And he's called the First Baptist Church of Charleston. He was called there in 1972 as minister. He served for 21 years. He now serves as an interim minister in the Kanawha Valley. He's active in the Kanawha Valley chapter of the NAACP. And it's my pleasure and honor to present to you the Reverend Ronald English.
It is my delight to be here. And I'm about to say one more time because I've often been up to Hilltop Baptist Center, which is right down the road when I was pastoring the First Baptist Church. And so it was territory, but still presents challenges to navigate. No doubt about that. Then the other challenge here is to find how I can make this I'm sure you've had those kind of situations where you put it on your computer and expect it to come up in the same print that you had at home. Doesn't work that way. It's much smaller. But I'll tell you what, I really felt like it's going to be an opportunity to have more of a conversation and kind of like to even have some time at the end if there's questions or things that we can share. I think that there's no way to deal with Black history or to talk about Black history without celebrating the lives and contributions of outstanding heroes. And that is usually informative, and it can be inspirational, but it may not be transformational. Because after we recite and give information about some of the heroes that you know and some that you don't know about Black heroes, sheroes, it still begs the question of, so what? Or another question of, what now what next? And that's really what I want to focus our attention on now. And deal with the question of what now? What next? That is really inspired by the last book that Dr. King wrote. It was entitled, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? That was in 1967. But I believe that that question is more appropriate in this moment than it may have been in 1967, because of what we have seen, what we have felt, and the mood of the moment being similar to a line that comes from Shakespeare. Times are out of joint and men have lost their reason. And so when times are out of joint, that's when we need to really look at what caused it to be out of joint and how can we reset it. I'll never forget that when I was a kid, the YMCA summer camp, we were playing softball. And I was on first base, and hit went into the outfield. And ordinarily, it would not have been long enough for me to get to third base. Before to stop at second, coach was telling me to stop at second. I said, I ain't stopping at second, I'm home. So I didn't stop at second. I on around and went home. And then as Dizzy Dean used to say, I slurred into home plate. Well, I looked up and my wrist, this wrist was broken. And it was painful. But since I had scored, the pain didn't matter at the moment. The coach came over and took my wrist and snapped it back into joint. And when I was taken to the hospital, the doctor said, you need to be glad that your coach snapped this back into joint, because otherwise you would have had a serious problem. When times are out of joint, then the question becomes, how can we snap it back into joint? And we do it by conversations like this, where we feel some connection and some joining and some effort to get some things back in joint or back in alignment. And that's what makes these kinds of conversations so important, and why I am so glad to be here. And so it's about dealing with where do we go from here, chaos or community, or what now, what next. Now, believe it or not, there is an insight that comes from the way Black folk talk. And that is, we don't say how you doing, man, or how you feeling. No, the way that we address each other, what's going on? What's up? And literally, when you think about that, it's really making a very profound question, asking a profound question. What's up? We know what's down, and we know what's around. But the only way that you can answer the question, what's up, is if you are looking up. And we need to develop and refine the capacity for looking up. And then there's another question that was popularized by Marvin Gaye, What's Going On? And it's really saying like, you need to be aware of what's going on, looking around you, really seeing what's going on, listening to what's going on. And so the combination of those two phrases says something about how Black History Month has presented a model for those heroes and sheroes who knew what was up. And often that was bad news, but who kept on striving anyhow because the ancestors were driving them to deal with what's going on. And so therefore, I choose to talk in terms of Black History Month and share these comments, hopefully lead into some questions, responses, kind of build our connections here in the time we have. I want to begin with two stories. Yes, I was ministerial assistant to Dr. King. Therefore, I heard him preach more than I heard him speak. And there are two stories that come to mind that I think fits in this moment. He would often tell a story about how he was being driven to the airport for a late around midnight. And at that time, Atlanta did not have all the 4-lane highways that they have now to the airport. In fact, the airport was not hardly as big as it is now. I think Atlanta Airport was about the third business in the world, second business in the world. Anyway, they didn't have those many highways going to the airport. And most of it around maybe 10 miles from where the airport located had 2 lanes. So his driver was on those 2-lane highways and became irritated by the fact that every time a car came in the direction, it seemed like they just kept their bright headlights on, because that's often what happens on 2-lane streets when you're going into a dark space. So he said, Doc, I'm tired of this. So the next time that somebody comes at me with their headlights on, I'm going to keep my headlights on so they can see what it feels like. Doc said, no, you can't do that, because somebody got to have some sense on this road. See, if you do, and often we are just kind of moved to give as we get, somebody got to have some sense on this road, because that's called retribution. And we are geared toward the practice of retribution. And I've been involved in some work called Restorative Justice. And it has a different route of dealing with suffering situations and even with offenders. The way that the system works is that the guilty person is responsible for coming to court and receiving the penalty of the offense that they committed against someone else. In our criminal justice system, if I have harmed you to the extent that I'm supposed to go to court, I'm not likely to see you again. Because from the court, if I'm found guilty, I go to the place where I will be punished. And therefore, there's no way to make any kind of connection in order to build any kind of relationship, because I am in the court. I am in jail. I am away from you. I'm away from any possibility of reaching any kind of reconciliation with you. That's how our system works. Restorative justice says that in any situation where there is harm, then you need to deal with both situations or both people that have been involved in the harm. The one that is harmed as well as the one who did the harm. And then you begin working at a way of reconciling over that situation, not to deliver that person who did the harm or person from taking responsibility. No, it means that you are able to sit eyeball to eyeball at some point. And sometimes it's in a circular situation because they got that notion from how the Indians and the people of the land resolve issues in circles, where they were able to listen to each other, talk to each other, make a connection in the circle that would help deal with the harm. Retribution does not deal with harm on the in the circle. It deals with harm on a one-on-one. And therefore, those who have been the harm is on both ends. One who did the harm and the one who was harmed. And so restorative justice says you restore a situation by way of looking for the healing that can come from the harm that has been done. That's why that story stays with me every time that I'm in a situation where I want to do some harm. I remember what Doc said. Somebody got to have some sense on this road. Somebody has to have some sense on this road. Second story that I heard, second word that I heard him often say from the pulpit, he had a way of modifying the Beatitudes, and it's almost like he spoke as though this one was one that didn't make it in the Bible. He said, "Go ye into all the world and keep your blood pressure down. And lo, I will make you a well-adjusted personality." That was Doc's contribution to the Beatitude. Go ye into all the world, keep your blood pressure down, and lo, I will make you a well-adjusted personality. Now, the reason that is so profound is that you ask yourself, what usually sends your blood pressure up? It's because, it might be because of something you ate, but often it's because of something that has happened to you, of somebody that has tried to put you down, or either somebody that has tried to do you harm, or somebody that's done you wrong, or a relationship that has gone sour. Those are the kind of things that causes your blood pressure to rise. And therefore, Doc's prescription makes a whole lot of sense of going into the world and keeping your blood pressure down, and I will make you a well-adjusted personality so that you can survive the situation that caused your blood pressure to rise. Go ye into the world. So you have to ask, pressure of what now? In the moment and in the days that we live have forced us into the stress and distress, almost to the point where we ask, does anybody have any common sense? Common sense in the sense that is magnified by the substance of soul force, that is the primary force of the movement, the because common sense gives rise to a people being able to do extraordinary things because of what's working on the inside in order to work on the outside. This is Black History Month, which was the brainchild of Carter G. Woodson. Carter G. Woodson is a native of West Virginia. And he became the second Black male to graduate from Harvard University. The first one was W.B. Du Bois, who was a brilliant intellectual. But the second one was Carter G. Woodson, who became a historian, and his history is filled with heroes and sheroes who dominated such courage that they displayed during the time. Therefore, that's what made him begin writing the story, those heroes and sheroes, in what's name is Black History Month, but now has become, that was Black History Week, but now has become Black History Month. Part of what has helped African Americans and brought us to this moment is how we remember not just the heroes and sheroes, but the common ordinary folk, and the words and witness that shows up in spirituals, African American spirituals. And one that comes to mind is the evidence of what one writer called courage as grace under pressure. Courage is grace under pressure. It is in those under pressure moments that you really discover what courage is. Because in those moments, it is not about retribution and giving as you get, because the history of a people touched by nature's son is filled with the soul force of men and women who walked in the world against contrary winds with a faith that defied defeat because of their sense of courage. Many of us know some of those heroes, Frederick Douglass, who kept sitting at the side of Abraham Lincoln and reminding him, Mr. President, this Civil War is not about saving the Union, it's about freeing the slaves. And he sat there long enough to convince Lincoln to write the Emancipation Proclamation. Harriet Tubman is the legendary conductor of the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad is not tracks running underground. It was a connection that provided those slaves who were able to escape at night a way of finding their way to freedom up north and into Canada. And that's how the spiritual development bound for Canaan's land, where thousands of slaves in the heat of the night found a way to network. That's where a spiritual called Wade in the Water comes from. Wade in the water. God's going to trouble the water. Most spirituals have a double meaning. Wade in the water meant that when you get in the water, in order for the hounds that are looking for you will lose the scent of finding you. That's where you wade. You don't swim, because swimming will rupture too much water. You just wade in the water with the confidence that God is on your side, and he's going to make a way for you to make a connection in order to find your way through the water and catch the hand of somebody out of the water that will help you find your post and place on the Underground Railroad that's heading up to Freedom's Land. That's how those common sense kind of expressions really share something about where we came from. But Black history is a living history in which the crisis situations call them to find hope in the midst of hurt and really live out the meaning of that word crisis. Some of you may have discovered that that word crisis is made up of two characters from Chinese. One character represents danger, and the other character represents opportunity, which means that crisis is a dangerous opportunity. And when you consider that, then you look at every crisis situation differently. Because crisis may be the way in which a teaching moment shows up. And if there is any way that the lessons of history can have impact on where we are, it's when we understand that in moments of crisis, we find a new way of understanding how to manage when times are out of joint and men have lost their reason. One of the ways of managing crisis and understanding it as a dangerous opportunity is to live by these words that from a time of crisis, we have a dangerous opportunity to reckon with our history and come to a awakening awareness of who we are shown up. Coming to an awakening awareness of who we are shown up. Because the story of what we've been told in terms of who we are and how we got here has been incomplete for a long time. And so it becomes a means by which we are able to become honest with our own history. And Dr. Phil says, you can't heal what you don't acknowledge. You can't heal what you don't acknowledge. Because if we are trying to fool ourselves in terms of being better than we really are, then we escape the moment in which we can find healing in the midst of the hurt. Because the hurt helped us to understand what we need to heal. No kind of drug can really deal with the hurt. It can give you the impression of getting some relief in the moment. But unless you understand what the hurt is, there is no way to deal with it realistically in order for a difference to be made. And that's why, even in the midst of the situation that we are in now, we are standing in the moment where if we really deal with the hurt and what's causing the hurt, we can find some healing. It's only when we go into that depth of having a zeal for finding that healing, that we can find a way for dealing with the hurt. All of this really leads to what I want to use toward a conclusion. And that is, there are some patterns in the universe that help us to see how we can move from hurt to healing when we pay attention. You recall from the biblical narrative that creation was the way that one writer said God pulled cosmos out of chaos. The earth was without form and void, darkness. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. Now, the reason that I have to keep remembering that is because every place that we see darkness, it is not separate from light. It is the manifestation of the need for light to come in that place and in that space. But one of the fundamental lessons of history is when it is darkest, you can see the stars. I was riding on a horse in the mountains of that other great state, mountain state, Colorado. So out there, the skies are a little bit clearer because it doesn't have so much smog going up. And that was the first time I really saw and looked up and had no idea that was that plethora of stars. And that's because the skies were so dark that it helped you to be able to see the stars. Therefore, stars against darkness reveal how, unless there is some darkness, you will not recognize the light. It becomes a situation where in any kind of place where we find darkness, we can find a way, if we are looking for it, to find the light. When it is darkness, we see the stars. Other times in our history, there have been clouds of discontent. And somehow there is a force within us, when present, helps us to keep hope alive. And in this moment, in these times, it looks like hope has gone on holiday. But that's why and when the old spirit used to say, there is something on the inside working on the outside. And when there is something on the inside working on the outside, then we can find a reason to rejoice in some situations that it would seem like it's almost impossible. But spiritual also reminds us of of what happens also. And that is there's always something on the outside working on the inside. And we have to make a choice in terms of whether we're going to allow the stuff on the outside to keep us awake at night, to keep us troubled of mind and spirit, to keep us bitter, rather than recognizing how we are blessed, when there is something on the inside working on the outside. That is the manifestation of courage as grace under pressure, because it is the pressure that helps us to determine how grace is working for our good and how God in those kinds of situations is still working for our good. That is what keeps hope alive. That God is working through the storm for our good. There's a story that I want to end with that was told by the prize-winning author, Toni Morrison, while she was talking to a group of children. And the story goes that she was telling of her experience of hearing a story of a group of children that tried to test the powers and the wisdom of a wise elder in the tribe. And the wise elder happened to be blind. So one child took a bird and grasped it in the hand and then approached the wise elder saying, "Is the bird dead or alive?" And as soon as he chose one, she was going to make sure that the other was the case. That if he said it's dead, then she would let it go. But if he said that it was alive, she would squeeze it. But the wise elder said, "I don't know if it's dead or alive. I just know it's in your hands. It's in your hands." And so I close with one poem that has been a continuing theme of hope in my life. It's a poem that simply says, "Be under no illusion. You will gather unto yourself the images of the things you love. And as you go and grow, the likes, the shapes, the shadows of the things you prefer will come to you inevitably, invariably as bees to their eye. And they will leave in you, and that distilled essence, something that would be as sweet as honey or as bitter as gall. Men see the color in the As men see the color in the waves, so will your eyes show and your heart reveal the things that you love. And as you go and grow, the likes, the shapes, the shadows of the things you prefer will come to you inevitably as bees to that eye. And in your mind and spirit, they will leave that distilled essence as sweet as honey or as bitter as gall. For we become like that which we love, and the image thereof is written on your brow. Keep hope.
Yes, sir, you're on here for questions and answers. Right there you are.
Yeah. I had overlooked that. Thank you very much. All right. Yeah. I always look forward to that. See, number one, what you heard. And number two, how you feel about what you heard. And then that helps me in terms of how I will be mindful of where it's making a connection or where it might be creating disconnect. So that's helped me. So that's why I'm always excited by possibility of conversation. after speaking of what you heard and how you heard it. What kind of crisis in the population? I think it's in two places. Number one, climate change is still a difficult conversation to have in our because there are some patterns that we have recognized that have been profitable, and even though there has been a transition into coal firing, plants that do not depend on one source of fuel. Those challenges still persist. So I think the climate change becomes one of those areas where we begin to recognize how we have been harming ourselves. But to relieve the harm cost, and sometimes the cost feel like it's too high to pay, or it injures some part of the economy. So I think climate change is one of. And as I think about that question, I remember what Dr. King had identified around the time that he died in a book called Where We Go From Here. By the way, I'm glad that we're kind of giving some recognition to the Dream King, but we have given too much focus on the Dream King and not recognized the Radical King. The Radical King was the one that wrote that book in 1967. And then, I don't know whether any of y'all have ever seen an interview that he did in the sanctuary at Ebenezer about 2 months before he was killed. And Sander Van Ocker, who was interviewing him from NBC News, asked him, Dr. King, what do you think is happening to your dream? Dr. King said, my dream has become a nightmare. Dr. King said, my dream has become a nightmare. Why? Because he had called out what he called the 3 evils of American society: militarism, racism, and economic injustice. Militarism, because he was against the war in Vietnam. And we found out that he was right about that kind of opposition. Economic injustice, because he went to Memphis for a poor people's campaign to support garbage workers. He could have gone, and in fact, he was invited back there because of situations that had gone awry when he was there before, and so he got to go back to Memphis, and that's when he was killed. But he went to Memphis to deal with an economic situation, garbage. And then racism was always something that continually confronted him and SCLC to deal with that. Those are the 3 evils that we are dealing with. Those are the 3 evils that we are facing in a crisis situation. But by the same means, those evils that he called out present opportunity for us to see us, our resources, and our ability to manage in terms of dealing with that kind of crisis, or those kind of crises. as the dangerous opportunity where we can find healing. Okay. Yes, sir. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, they weren't members of Ebenezer. In fact, Andy was a minister himself. He was one Episcopalian congregational minister, and often preached at Ebenezer when Dr. King was out of the book. But he was a congregational minister. In fact, it's interesting that you mentioned his name because Andy is the oldest civil rights leader left. He will be celebrating in next year, and will be 90 years old. He's been around a long time, seen a lot. And I'm amazed at how his mind is so brilliant because he's really set up an international organization that has been traveling back and forth to Africa and other places where there is need for food, and has done research in terms of how to help folk get fed in those kind of situations just by knowing how to manipulate some growth patterns and things like that. So, and has been very active and just has always been a personal inspiration to me because he came to Charleston on a couple. Likewise, Julian Bond. He has been to Charleston on a couple of occasions, and I think died soon. But Julian had gone through several transformations because at one time he was a very active member of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which had chosen to deal with strategies for in the situation in the civil rights movement differently than the nonviolent approach that Dr. King was. They want to be a little bit more aggressive, and so they went around. Julian was in contact and connection with Stokely Carmichael for a period of time, but then he became a powerful. In fact, he became a senator in no, he wasn't a senator. Like he came to Charleston when he was in the legislature in Georgia. I think he became a senator, a congressman, in Georgia. And so he just kind of came, and then he became the executive director of the NAACP. And so he was really changing shifting in terms of the tools that he saw, in terms of using. And he felt that was a more aggressive, but at the same time, a way of getting and pursuing some of the goals that he had been working on all the time. So in his years, he kind of calmed down in terms of, but still had a militant mind for what he was doing. But both of those were acquaintances that I had the privilege of meeting on growing up in Atlanta, even being here. They came. Oh no, I knew him because I still maintain membership at Ebenezer. And when Joe Roberts passed away, he was the pastor that succeeded Dr. King. Well, I was two transitions. Dr. King and his father were co-pastors at Ebenezer. And so, Dr. King was a character. I just put it like that. But anyway, when folk came and filled the pews on Sundays, well, I mean, Dr. King would preach, you know, that would be really. Dr. King, but it was kind of the regular audience. Dr. King, that was a book written about him that really tells a lot of stories. And he was rather dogmatic. And even Dr. King knew that when talking to his father, and arguing with his father, that was only so far that he knew to go. I mean, because Daddy King set boundaries, and you don't cross those boundaries without paying a penalty. that was just who he was, because he always talked about the fact that he was a verdant country boy, which was true. You know, he came from a country town that wasn't too far from Atlanta. He did not learn how to read until he was grown. But after he learned how to read, he graduated from Morehouse, which is the same school that Dr. King graduated from, and I graduated from. But he had a lot to overcome, and so therefore he was respected because of how he had overcome, you know, a lot. And also he had a pretty good business mind. You know. So those are the kind of things that really kind of come to mind as you raise that question. I'm not sure if I answered the question. Oh, Senator Warnock, yeah. Right. Well, yeah, he came after Joseph Roberts left, and I met him because he did the funeral for both my mother and that's really when I got. And so he had always been on the track toward doing what he is doing. And I took a picture on one occasion when I went down there, and he was preaching. It was an occasion where Julian Bond showed up, and Julian Bond, John Lewis. Yeah, that's who it was. Julian Bond and John Lewis showed up at Ebenezer on the same Sunday, for some event that was going on there. You know. And at the end of the service, Dr. Warner invited me back to study, and we were having this conversation. And I said, "Oh, Julian Bond and James Lewis. I mean, they're in the same space." So I took a picture. And in that picture, it's like Julian is reaching out to Warnock. And when Warnock announced that he was going to head for Congress, that he was running for the Senate, I sent him a copy of this, and I said, "Warnock, this picture was taken in 2010, and 10 years later, you are on the way to the Senate. It's almost like Julian Bond was said, go get it. Go do it." Yeah, and he got a kick out of that because he responded. So yeah, that was a peculiar moment where Julian Bond and Lewis, what, James Lewis, John Lewis, I'm sorry, and John Lewis were in the same with Warnock, and took that picture, and it was an amazing moment. Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It was a good time. It was magnificent moments to have opportunity just to be around. Never met Stacey Abrams, but I'm glad you asked that because she plans on running again, and she has a brilliant mind. But I just found out last week. See, I worked as a unit manager at Mount Olive Correctional Complex. There was an inmate there by the name of Jimmy Gardner, and he had to really fight as far as trying to get out because he was falsely accused. So he finally, proved his case and got out. Then he decided to go into business and become a kind of a motivational speaker, that kind of thing. Moved to Atlanta. Well, guess who he started dating? The sister of Stacey Abrams. And I just found out the other day that he married, he married the sister of Stacey Abrams. And the guy would call me and say, you know who is a candidate for the Supreme Court? Jimmy's wife. I mean, that was just amazing. In terms of how she had come up the ladder and has become a candidate for the Supreme Court. Yeah, so yeah, you remind me a lot of stories now. Really fun. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, working on some thoughts along that line. Yeah. Came to pastor First Baptist. A person on the pulpit committee at the time was from Atlanta, and she called me, and her name Lucia James, and I had known her, but I knew the family. She called and asked Daddy King whether he had any recommendations to pastor First Baptist Church. That minister had died, and they were looking to fill that vacancy. And so I came, and I really didn't have any intention, of staying. but after they called, there was a competition with two others, and I was doing some work at the seminary I graduated from, and was enjoying it. But when they called, they had 3 occasions for me to come, and extended the call after that. So that's how I came here. But I often tell folks now, as a spiritual that says, I went to the valley and didn't go to stay, but my soul got happy, and I stayed all day. So yeah. So that's my response in terms of somebody asking me, why you stay here? Because I just kept finding other things to do. Yeah. Thanks for the question. All right. I think that it really starts at being, again, honest enough to recognize that you can't heal what you don't acknowledge. And there have been some aggressive changes reflected in the United Methodist Church because I worked at the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta. And the Methodist Church was one of the founding seminaries in that center. Methodist, Baptist, Episcopalian came on later, and Glorious Church of God in Christ. So we were in that kind of situation. Therefore, it was when the Black Methodist and Church Renewal was very active. And that's why I met Kane Hope. And he was the executive director of Black Methodist Church Renewal. And that's how we got to know some of the Methodists that were in the process of trying to make a difference. Like most movements like that, I mean, they go through a period of time where there's a lot of attention. And there is some results that comes out of that. But then certain forms are difficult to change in terms of the hierarchy. And so it became that. But just recently, I was intrigued in terms of, had you ever heard of Kane Hope Felder? Okay, yeah. He was a very young activist, but he also was a very well-known writer. But anyway, just recently I discovered that somebody had asked him, how could a mother name a son Cain? What mother would do that? In fact, he said himself, he got upset with his mother for naming him Cain. And he was kind of, as soon as he got grown enough, he was calling her out. Why you name me Cain? And she said, boy, let me say this. I named you Cain, but I often call you Kane Hope. And you need to understand that while I named you Cain as your first name, Hope is your second name. So that whatever you face, you will keep hope alive because it's in your name. Cain is in your name, but hope is in your name. So if you remember that, and that's when he really shifted in terms of his work that he was doing because he had a different ground for pursuing it. You know, that's why I ever met him. So Black Methodist Church were very aggressive in terms of how it was pursuing some issues that were bringing Black Methodists and white Methodists together. That was a time when there was a lot of connection across. And this was after Dr. King's assassination. It was part of what had caused some barriers to fall in terms of how we were really looking at how we needed to work together and how we needed to be together in terms of advancing at that moment. And I think that's still the challenge, but it has kind of shifted in terms of where grace under pressure. Well, grace is a gift. And when you recognize that, then that's how it becomes amazing. It becomes a power. But also helps to open up a different perspective on how you see things. That's why I like that phrase, something on the inside working on the outside. Because grace under pressure is courage. And so if it were not for the pressure, you wouldn't recognize the presence of the grace. So that's basically what becomes the salvific or strengthening moment of dealing with situations that don't feel good or look good, and helps to remember that crisis is a dangerous opportunity, because it provides an opportunity where what's working on the outside is pressure, but what's working on the inside is grace. And when you have that resource of something working on the inside, for the outside, so then you have a source that nobody can take away, but it becomes kind of a source that is grounded in some hope that weeping may endure for a night, joy comes in the morning. And also it continues to open up how there is a connection between the darkness and the light. And when you're really struggling in the darkness, that's when you see the star. And that's how it continues to visit me in certain situations where it got to keep hope. Yeah, not give up on the possibility of making connection with people that feel have been responsible for certain abuses that have been ingrained to where we are and who we are. But I think the more that we recognize how this is the time of searching and seeking and connecting, then it becomes a resource for a revolution. Both in values and that, but also how something on the inside keeps working on the outside. Thank you. Well, that's an interesting question because we were down at the Capitol the other day opposing what they were trying to do, critical race theory. And the interesting thing is, and I said this in my response to when I had a moment on the floor, I said, now, there's something about how the reaction to critical race theory reminds me of something. And that was the Kenora County textbook controversy. Y'all remember that? Because they were talking about the books that had been recommended, and nobody, except for Alice Moore and a few other folks, had really read the books. And therefore, there was a lot of tension in the community, as far as folks who had read the books had been told of what was in the books, and they took that word and developed their attitude toward the books. Well, fortunately, in that situation, they called together a textbook review committee, and I happened to be on it. But also there were some students on that. There were some teachers on that. And so we were able to at least come together to look at the books, and did that for about 6 months. And then finally, those books were received. My point is that responses to the critical race theory at this point has not defined. You can't pick up a book and say, this is a course in critical race theory. You can't do that because it's not there. It is a theory, and it's a theory taught at a graduate school level. So the only reason that there is some concern about critical race theory is because It's a part of a narrative that is causing folk to feel like in this moment that, hold up, we got to slow down here in terms of how Black folk be recognized, and that is a resurgence of certain racist patterns and those kinds of things. And so this is a part of that narrative. And hopefully those bills that have been preventing even consideration of what it is and how people can actually have a conversation, even though it might be a confrontation in the conversation, but at least you have a conversation and you're not having somebody just decide on something that ain't here yet. But it's because of the publicity or because of the way that that narrative is being used. That, and I really got upset when I found out that folks were using Dr. King's phrase about from the I Have a Dream speech, I want to live in a nation where my children will grow up where they are not judged by the color of their skin, by the content of their character. And when I heard one of those senators, and it's been going on using Dr. King's phrase like that, I said, yeah, that's what he said. But given the situation here and now, I believe that it would be a more appropriate way of understanding what he meant. Saying that we are now in a situation where the color of one's skin defines the content of that character, and it ain't good. You know, so that's why I'm appalled that they use his terms to hold what they see as critical race theory that will not be taught in school because it's a graduate school level course. And it doesn't have a manual to go by. It's something that has been utilized for a lot of other purposes. And by folks that want to do and set back the clock on how far we have come. Oh yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, thank you. But at least if it opens up some avenues for having a chance to talk, because that was what really caused the protest. It had been sent directly to the judiciary to be discussed and them to make without it going into a public forum where that could be a hearing. So that's what we were really driving at. That at least folks ought to be heard in terms of what their opinions are, what they think. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Oh yeah. 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 Well, I wish you could go on the road with me. I mean, seriously, because see, when you have somebody from this community talking like that, it shows that it just ain't us. It just shows that somebody has an understanding of how this is being generated and used and abused by forces that have a different intention, and not for the purpose of bringing any educational tool into the classroom, but trying to keep stuff out of the classroom that really needs to be there, and has been there in order to help make a difference. Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, yeah, we need to get that on the road. I gotta go back to that. I found somebody in Oak Hill that we need. Yeah, man. I gotta get your car. Yeah. Yeah, we were satisfied in terms of some of the gains that were made in all kind of textbook controversy, because they were just kind of dismissing a whole lot of stuff, just because fear was there. Yeah. Not even looking at what was there, but what they feared. That's how that narrative works, to the disadvantage of really getting to an awareness and the stage of awareness where we can learn how to live together, because King often said that if we don't learn to live together as brothers, we will perish as fools. If we don't learn to live together as brothers, we will perish as fools. Yeah, I see some points of the perishing, no doubt about it. But it's a slippery slope, and want to keep hope alive that out of this discussion, we really get to the core of what has been hidden in order to deal with the hurt and look for ways of healing. And that only comes when you acknowledge the problem and the depth of it. So I feel like good news is we now see what needs to be healed. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you, Reverend English. I think everyone seemed to enjoy that presentation a great deal. I'll make one comment. Some years ago, when I was much younger, I was in a meeting with Julian Bond, and someone asked him, how do you prepare your speeches? You're all over the place, speaking here, there, you're flying from one state to the other. Julian Bond said, I try to sometimes have a humorous story to loosen up my audience a little bit. Depends on what they're like. I look out amongst them, think, do they need to be loosened, or are they already? And so someone said, well, what kind of a story would you tell? He said, let me tell you one that I use from time to time. Apparently there was a fancy dinner party in London, and Winston Churchill had far too much to drink, far too much. And some aristocratic lady approached him and said, Sir Winston, you are drunk, disgustingly drunk. And he looked at her and says, ma'am, I am, but you're disgustingly ugly. Absolutely disgustingly ugly. But he said, I have one thing you don't. In the morning, I'll be sober. Julian Bond told that, and it went over quite well with our little group. That's long ago. Folks, I'm very glad you all came out. The city of Oak Hill is glad. Hopefully we'll see you back next week. We have two more. Next week, we'll hear from Dr. Priscilla Jordan, who lives in Anstead, has a PhD in history, and has written an extensive paper, or really a dissertation on the life of Ida B. Wells, who was a journalist, a crusader for justice. I think you'll really enjoy hearing about Ida B. Wells from Dr. Priscilla Jordan. And our next speaker on the 26th is also a Fayette County native, and that is the Reverend Matthew Watts, who originally lived at Mount Hope, who's active in so many things in the Kenora Valley. So we have Dr. Priscilla Jordan next week. Hopefully we'll see you all back for that one. It'll be extremely interesting. I knew Mrs. Jordan's late husband, and her son was a student of mine years ago, Eric. And then the Reverend Matthew Watts on the 26th will round out the whole month of Black History studies and lectures. And I hope to see you all back. Come back from Beckley, bring more Beckleyians with you. Yeah, bring as many as you want. We have a Fayetteville Council member here, Gabe Pena showed up. So we have 3 towns represented here with council people. So I thank you, and there are snacks over here. And if you have anything else you just want to say to Reverend English, he's still over there. And I appreciate it. And I'll see you next week at 6 o'clock. All these are at 6 o'clock. Thank you.